Your lavender needs this before fall, or it won't survive winter. If you've ever watched a lavender plant that looked completely healthy in September turn into a pile of gray, brittle sticks by the following spring, I want you to know something right away. That wasn't the cold that killed it. Not directly, anyway. What actually killed your lavender happened weeks before the first frost even showed up, and almost nobody realizes it until it's already too late to fix. Lavender has this reputation as an indestructible, drought-tolerant, practically ignore-it plant. And honestly, during the growing season, that reputation is well earned. But going into fall, lavender becomes surprisingly fragile, and the mistakes that finish it off usually happen in August and September, not December. By the time winter actually arrives, the outcome has already been decided, and there's very little you can do once the ground has frozen solid. So today, I'm walking you through exactly what your lavender needs before fall hits, the handful of things you have to get right in the next few weeks if you want to see it come back thick and fragrant next spring instead of finding a dead, woody skeleton where your lavender used to be. Stick around because the third one surprises almost everyone, and it's the opposite of what most people instinctively want to do this time of year. And if you're new here, welcome. We talk about growing real, thriving gardens without the fluff, so go ahead and subscribe while you're at it. It's not the cold, it's the wet. Let's clear up the biggest misconception right away, because everything else in this video builds on it. Most people assume lavender dies in winter because it froze. In reality, the number one killer of lavender going into winter isn't cold temperatures at all. It's moisture. Lavender evolved in the rocky, sun-baked, fast-draining hillsides of the Mediterranean. Its roots are built for soil that dries out quickly. What they are absolutely not built for is sitting in cold, saturated soil for weeks on end, which is exactly what happens in a lot of gardens once fall rains set in and the ground stops draining as fast as it did in summer. Cold soil holds moisture longer than warm soil, evaporation slows way down, and if your lavender's roots are sitting in that wet, cold soil through October and November, root rot sets in long before any hard freeze ever touches the plant. Then, when winter's actual cold arrives, it's just finishing off a plant whose root system was already compromised. So before you do anything else this fall, walk over to your lavender after the next rain and check how quickly the water disappears around the base. If it's still visibly damp a day later, that's your first and most important problem to solve. And we'll get into exactly how in just a minute. I actually learned this the frustrating way myself. I had a beautiful row of English lavender along a walkway, and one particular plant at the low end of that row, right where water naturally collected after every rain, went from thriving to completely dead over a single winter, while every other plant in that exact same row, planted the exact same day, sailed through just fine. Same variety, same care, same fertilizer schedule. The only difference was that one spot sat 2 inches lower than the rest of the bed. That's how much drainage alone can matter, and it's exactly why this next section is worth taking seriously, rather than skimming past. Secret number 1, stop feeding it now. Here's something that feels completely wrong to do, but it matters more than almost anything else on this list. If you've been fertilizing your lavender through the summer, or even just giving it the occasional dose of an all-purpose plant food, you need to stop completely by late summer, ideally no later than the end of August. Fertilizer, especially anything with nitrogen in it, pushes the plant to produce soft, tender, new growth. That's great in June when the plant has months of warm weather ahead to harden that growth into sturdier stems. It is a disaster in September because that soft new growth doesn't have time to toughen up before the first frost hits. Tender growth is exactly what freezes first, and once it freezes, that damage often travels back into the older, established wood of the plant, taking healthy stems down with it. So resist the urge to give your lavender one more feeding to help it prepare for winter. Counterintuitively, the best thing you can do nutritionally at this point in the year is nothing at all. Let the plant naturally slow down and start hardening off on its own schedule. This applies even if your lavender is planted in fairly poor, low-nutrient soil, which honestly is where lavender tends to perform best anyway. Unlike a lot of garden plants that need consistent feeding right up until frost, lavender actually prefers to be a little neglected. If you've been treating it like your roses or your hydrangeas, giving it regular feedings all season long, fall is the moment to break that habit completely. Think of it less as depriving the plant and more as simply letting it do what it evolved to do on its own. Secret number 2, fix your drainage before the ground gets wet. We already talked about why wet soil is lavender's real enemy heading into winter, so now let's actually solve it. And the good news is this is far easier to fix in September than it is to fix in January. If your lavender is planted in regular garden soil that holds moisture, mix in coarse sand, fine gravel, or perlite right around the root zone now, while the soil is still workable and dry. You're not trying to amend your entire garden bed, just dramatically improve drainage in the specific area right around each plant's roots. If your lavender has always struggled and you suspect drainage has been an issue since day one, consider whether it's time to lift the plant and replant it slightly raised, even just a few inches above the surrounding soil level. That small elevation change is often the difference between a lavender plant that sails through winter and one that rots from the crown down. If you're growing lavender in containers, drainage is even more critical, since pots hold water longer than ground soil and freeze from the outside in. Make sure your pot has generous drainage holes, and consider setting it up on pot feet or a small stand so water can actually escape freely rather than pooling underneath. One more thing worth checking while you're at it. Take a look at what's happening uphill or upslope from your lavender bed. Sometimes the moisture problem isn't really about the soil directly around the plant at all, it's about runoff traveling downhill from a roof gutter, a downspout, or a higher section of lawn, and collecting right where your lavender happens to be planted. If that's the case, even perfect soil amendment right at the plant won't fully solve things, because you're fighting a constant new supply of water arriving from somewhere else. A small diversion trench, or simply redirecting a downspout extension away from the bed, can solve a drainage problem that no amount of gravel or raised planting will fix on its own. Secret number 3. Do not do a hard prune. Right now, this is the one that trips up almost everyone, because it goes against every instinct you have heading into fall. When the growing season winds down, the natural urge is to tidy everything up, cut things back, make the garden look neat before winter. Please do not do this to your lavender right now. Lavender should only ever get a hard prune once, right after it finishes its main summer bloom back in July or early August, while there's still plenty of warm growing season left for the plant to recover and put on some fresh, hardened growth before frost. If you missed that window and you're watching this in late August or September, the answer is not to prune hard now to catch up. A significant prune this late in the season forces the plant to push out new growth precisely when it should be shutting down and hardening off for winter, and that new growth is exactly the tender tissue that gets destroyed by the first freeze, often taking the health of the whole plant down with it. If your lavender genuinely looks messy or overgrown right now, the most you should do is a very light shape, snipping off a few stray spent flower stalks. Save the real pruning for next year, timed right after that summer bloom finishes, not as a fall cleanup task. I know it's tempting to want your garden looking crisp and tidy before the first frost, especially if everything else around it is getting cut back for winter. But lavender genuinely doesn't follow the same rules as your perennials or your grasses. Where cutting back a spent perennial signals it to go dormant safely, cutting back lavender this late signals it to try growing again, at exactly the wrong moment. If it helps, think of any woody, overgrown-looking stems right now less as an eyesore and more as protective structure the plant is using to shield its lower growth through winter. You'll get your chance to clean it up properly in just a few months. Secret number 4. Mulch. The right way, or don't mulch. At all. Mulching feels like an obvious, safe thing to do before winter, and for most plants, it absolutely is. For lavender, mulching the wrong way can actually be worse than not mulching at all. So let's get specific here. Traditional organic mulch, things like wood chips, shredded bark, or straw, holds moisture directly against the base of the plant. Remember everything we've already covered about moisture being lavender's real enemy. Piling a moisture-retaining material right up against the crown of your lavender plant is essentially guaranteeing rot right where the plant is most vulnerable. So skip the wood chips here. Instead, if you want to mulch your lavender for winter, use something like coarse gravel, small decorative stone, or crushed rock. This type of mulch actually helps drainage instead of hurting it, while still providing a small buffer of insulation and helping reflect a bit of extra warmth back onto the plant during sunny winter days. Apply it in a thin layer, and importantly, keep it a couple of inches back from the actual base of the plant so the crown itself has room to breathe. If you're gardening in a colder zone, say zone 5 or 6, and you're growing one of the less hardy lavender varieties, a little extra physical protection can help too. A loose covering of burlap during the harshest cold, Snaps works well since it protects from wind and ice without trapping moisture the way plastic sheeting does. Just avoid wrapping your lavender in anything airtight or plastic, because that traps humidity right against the plant and creates the exact rot conditions we've been trying to avoid this whole video. Secret number 5. Know which lavender you're actually growing. Here's something that catches a lot of people off guard, especially if you bought your lavender from a big box store without really checking the variety. Not all lavender is equally cold hardy, and if you're growing the wrong type for your zone, no amount of drainage fixing or mulching technique is going to save it from a genuinely harsh winter. English lavender varieties are your most cold hardy option, generally handling winters down through zone 5, sometimes even zone 4 with excellent sighting and protection. French lavender and Spanish lavender, on the other hand, are considerably more tender, typically only reliably hardy down to around zone 8 or 9. If you're in a colder region and you planted one of these more tender types, either because it was what was available locally or because you loved the look, it might genuinely be worth treating it like an annual, or better yet, keeping it in a container that you can move into a sheltered garage or unheated but frost-free space for the winter months, rather than expecting it to survive planted directly in the ground. Take a minute this fall to actually identify what variety you have. It's one of those small pieces of information that completely changes what winterizing even means for your specific plant. If you're not sure which type you're growing, there are a couple of quick visual clues that can help. English lavender tends to have narrower, more compact flower spikes and a shorter, denser overall shape. French and Spanish varieties often have those distinctive little rabbit ear petals sticking up from the top of the flower head, and they tend to grow a bit taller and looser. When in doubt, the original plant tag or a quick photo comparison search can usually settle it. It's worth the 5 minutes because planning the wrong winter strategy around the wrong assumption is exactly how a lot of otherwise careful gardeners still end up losing their lavender. Secret number 6. Turn down the water before the weather does it for you. This last one gets overlooked constantly, and it ties directly back to everything we've already covered about moisture being lavender's real enemy heading into winter. If you're on any kind of automatic irrigation system, whether that's a drip line just for your garden beds or a full sprinkler system that also covers your lawn, there's a good chance it's still running on essentially the same summer schedule it's been on since June. And that's a problem because your lavender's water needs drop off dramatically once temperatures start cooling down in fall, at exactly the same time your irrigation timer is often still delivering full summer volume. Think about what that actually means combined with everything else we've talked about. You've fixed the soil drainage, you've stopped fertilizing, you've resisted the urge to prune, and then, twice a week, an automated system quietly floods that same root zone with water it no longer needs, right as fall rains are already starting to pick up the slack on their own. All that careful work gets undermined by a sprinkler timer nobody remembered to adjust. So sometime in early September, go out and actually look at your irrigation schedule instead of just trusting it's fine. For in-ground lavender, you can typically cut watering frequency in half starting around Labor Day, and in most climates you can stop supplemental watering entirely by the time nighttime temperatures are consistently dropping into the 40s. Established lavender that's been in the ground more than a season or two usually doesn't need any help from you at all once fall rain becomes reliable. Its whole root system is built to pull through on far less water than you'd think, and giving it less is almost always safer than giving it more. Container lavender needs a slightly different approach since pots dry out differently than ground soil, especially as the weather cools and evaporation slows way down. Rather than watering on a fixed schedule, get in the habit of actually checking the soil a couple of inches down before you water at all. If it's still damp under the surface, wait. A lot of potted lavender doesn't die from underwatering in fall, it dies from well-meaning owners sticking to the same watering habits they had in July long after the plant's actual needs have changed. And if you've got lavender planted anywhere near your lawn, keep an eye on whether your regular lawn watering is accidentally reaching those beds too. Lawns often get watered later into fall than garden beds do, since grass keeps growing a bit longer into the season, and overspray or runoff from a lawn zone can quietly keep a nearby lavender bed wetter than you'd ever guess just by checking the forecast. Walking your yard with this in mind, right after your sprinklers run, takes maybe 10 minutes and can catch a problem that would otherwise undo every other step on this list. It sounds like a small, almost forgettable detail compared to drainage and pruning and mulch, but I'd argue it's actually the easiest win on this entire list, precisely because it doesn't cost you a single dollar or require digging up a single plant. It's just a matter of walking outside, turning a dial, and letting your lavender finally experience the dry, quiet fall it's been evolved for all along. Bringing it all together. So here's the real picture behind lavender and winter survival. It was never really about the cold itself. It's about moisture management, timing, and knowing your specific variety, all handled correctly in these next few weeks before fall really sets in. Stop feeding it now so it isn't pushing tender new growth right into frost season. Fix your drainage while the soil is still workable, because wet roots are lavender's true winter enemy. Resist the urge to do a hard prune this late in the year. Save that for right after next summer's bloom instead. Mulch with gravel, not organic material, and keep it away from direct contact with the crown. And finally, know whether you're growing a cold, hardy English variety or a more tender French or Spanish one, because that single fact changes your entire winter strategy. Get these 5 things right in the next few weeks, and there's a very good chance your lavender comes back next spring just as full and fragrant as it was this year, instead of becoming another one of those disappointing piles of gray sticks so many gardeners deal with every single spring. If this helped you out, do me a favor and hit that like button. It genuinely helps this reach other gardeners dealing with the exact same worry about their lavender heading into winter. And if you want more honest, no-fluff gardening advice like this, go ahead and subscribe, because we've got a lot more of these coming. Let me know down in the comments, what zone are you gardening in, and has your lavender made it through winter before? Or is this the first year you're trying to get it right? Drop your zone number below 2, since the strategy that works perfectly in zone 8 might genuinely be the wrong approach for someone gardening in zone 5, and it helps everyone else watching to see what's actually working in a climate similar to their own. I read every single comment, and some of the best tips I've ever shared in these videos came from things you all taught me first. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.